This is the quiet end, and tonight I'll tell you a story titled The Marionette's Shadow. Let's begin. Elias Grimbrook huddled over his workbench, the dim amber light of an oil lamp flickering weakly against the cramped, shadow-riddled corners of his workshop. The scent of varnish and aging wood clung to the air, heavy and suffocating. His hands, calloused and trembling with fatigue, guided the small blade over the marionette's delicate wooden face, carving the faint curve of a smile with painstaking precision. The hour was late, later than he cared to admit, but his obsession wouldn't let him rest. As the knife slipped from his fingers just slightly, the glow of the lamp wavered, casting a jitter of shadows along the cluttered walls. His own silhouette stretched serpentine behind him, but something about it was wrong, strange. It shifted when he didn't, an undulation, a twist that was unfamiliar. Elias froze mid-carve, the blade hovering a hair's breadth from the puppet's cheek. "Just the light," he muttered aloud, though his voice betrayed an edge of uncertainty. Resolving to dismiss his concern, he returned to his work, but a cold prickle ran down his back. From the corner of his eye, he swore his shadow had lifted its arm, though his hands remained steady on the marionette. His breath hitched. The movement wasn't a small flicker. It was a deliberate, mocking wave. Everything seemed to stop. The groan of the wind against the thin walls of the workshop, the creak of the old wood beneath his boots. Even his own heartbeat felt suspended, waiting. He turned, slowly, his eyes searching the darkened corners of the room as though expecting an intruder. Nothing. Just tools, clutter, and wood stacked in piles where the light barely reached. Yet the shadow remained, unnatural in its stillness. He swallowed hard, the realization heavier now. A presence, unseen but palpable, hung over him like a noose waiting to tighten. Elias woke with a start, his neck stiff from where he had slumped at the workbench. The lamp had long since burned out, leaving the workshop draped in a suffocating darkness. He blinked, disoriented, the remnants of uneasy dreams still clinging to him like cobwebs. But it wasn't his dreams that sent a shiver down his spine. It was the silence, too deep, too still. He stood, stretching his tired limbs, only to freeze at the sight before him. The marionettes, dozens of them, had moved. No longer lined up on their shelves or neatly arranged on the table, they now stood in twisted poses throughout the room. One clung to the rafters, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, its empty eye sockets staring down at him. Another sat slumped against the far wall, its carved mouth curved into a grotesque smile Elias swore he hadn't made. The worst was the figure by the door, a tall marionette he had carved years ago, crudely fashioned, never finished, posed with outstretched arms, its hands clutching at a stuffed bear scorched from some long-forgotten fire. The image struck Elias like a slap. It was too familiar, plucked from a memory he had tried for years to bury, left raw and exposed under the pale gleam of moonlight pouring through the window. "No," he murmured, stepping back, his pulse pounding in his ears. "No, this can't be." In a surge of rage and terror, he grabbed the nearest marionette, hurling it to the ground. The wood cracked with a satisfying crunch, but when he reached for another, his hand stopped midair. Panic flared as he strained against his own body, his arm locked in place as if unseen threads bound his every muscle. He staggered back, his breath coming in short, frantic gasps, the sensation spreading through him like ice, not just his limbs but his chest, his throat, even his thoughts, as though something else held him. A sound brushed his ears, low and faint, like the whisper of dry leaves shifting against one another. Except it wasn't from the room, it was inside his head. The shadow on the wall had grown, stretched impossibly tall, eclipsing the workshop entirely. Though it had no face, Elias could feel its gaze burrowing into him, dissecting, mocking. Its whispers were unintelligible, yet deafening, each word a dagger of unease carving into his sanity. Through clenched teeth, Elias finally screamed, his voice swallowed by the oppressive blackness enveloping him. Elias staggered to the door, fumbling with the handle as panic surged through his veins. It wouldn't budge, not at first. When it finally gave under his frantic pull, a rush of cold air hit him. Relief melted into dread as his eyes fell upon the impossibility before him. The hallway he expected was gone. Instead, the room beyond was the workshop. His workshop. Again. His breath quickened as he slammed the door shut, only to spin toward the opposite exit. He ran, shoving the second door open, only to find the same room greeting him. The same marionettes, the same suffocating shadows. No matter how many doors he tried, no matter how desperately he turned the knobs, every path led him back to the thing he was trying to escape. The shadow had spread now, its amorphous form stretching over the ceiling and walls. It loomed larger, darker, a living blot that seemed to tug at the edges of his resolve. And the marionettes, oh, the marionettes, they had moved again. They weren't still now, though. They jerked into motion as if yanked by invisible strings, their glassy eyes reflecting dim light. One figure stepped forward, its gait unnatural and halting. Elias's knees buckled as he recognized the scene. An old man, hunched over and sickly, stood at its center, his wooden hand pointing accusingly. The memory was vivid, raw. Elias had abandoned that man, his own father, when he had needed him most. Another figure stumbled into place, a young woman holding her hands to her face, silent tears carved into her wooden cheeks. Elias tried to look away, but he couldn't. The weight of the shame crushed down on him. She was carved like his lost fiancée. The argument, the spiteful words, the abandonment, the shadow knew. It knew. "Stop it," Elias shouted, clutching his head. "Stop!" The room didn't listen. The shadows danced silently, stringing the marionettes into grotesque recreations. Betrayal, cruelty, neglect, the weight of his buried sins unearthed and dragged into the light. Even when Elias tried to close his eyes, the whispers thundered over him. A bitter chuckle echoed through the nothingness, invading his mind as if the darkness itself was laughing. Desperation clawed at him. He scrambled to the newest door, kicking it open with all his strength. But when he stumbled through, it was there again, his workbench, the lamp's dim glow, the shadow stretching impossibly dark across the walls. "You can't keep me here," he whispered, pressing his back to the door before sliding down to the floor. Yet he already doubted the words as he felt the shadow deepen. Elias's hands betrayed him before he even realized what was happening. At first, it felt like an itch, a faint pull somewhere deep beneath the skin, urging him toward the workbench. But by the time he grasped the carving tools, the pull became something else entirely. Strings. Invisible, unyielding, they yanked his arms against his will, positioning his fingers with the cruel precision of a puppeteer. "No, stop. Let me go!" Elias groaned, his voice breaking as his body disobeyed him. His trembling left hand held a block of wood while his right began carving lines too sharp, angles too monstrous to evoke anything human. The grotesque marionette began to take form beneath his blade, its face twisted into a leer that seemed alive. More alive than wood should ever be. The puppets surrounding him seemed to wake in unison. Their glassy eyes reflected his frantic movements, almost accusing him. No matter which way Elias turned, those cruel stares followed him, catching the lamplight in unnatural flashes like they burned with hidden rage. And yet they whispered too, low voices slithering through the air like snakes. "You made us," the voices intoned, their edges sharp, their timbre echoing fragments of his own voice. "Every cut, every stroke, your hand, your creation, architect of fear, of ruin." Elias shook his head violently, fighting the strings that forced his hands to carve deeper grooves into the puppet's face. The whispers continued, layering over each other until the noise was deafening. "How many lives did you carve away? How many places did you cut yourself free from because you couldn't bear the weight? Tell us, Elias, which tool will you use for your own guilt?" His grip tightened around the blade involuntarily, the motion so close to maddening that he almost released a scream. But what poured from his lips wasn't anger, it was fear. Pure, searing fear, as if the strings had latched onto his soul itself. The marionette in his hands twisted into something even darker, something that stared back at him with grotesque satisfaction. Elias could feel them now, deep in his mind. The strings weren't just forcing his movements, they were winding tighter, knotting themselves around everything he was. Every thought, every regret, every moment of weakness served only to pull the strings further into place. Elias stood trembling in the center of the workshop, surrounded by marionettes frozen in grotesque poses. The shadow now consumed the walls entirely, its edges pulsating like dark tendrils alive with malice. In a fit of desperation, of rage, he screamed into the encroaching void. "What are you? What do you want from me? Elias's voice cracked, echoing back from the cavernous darkness that seemed to swallow all light. His hands curled into fists, trembling against the invisible strings that still chained him. The shadow shifted, not a movement of light or form, but something deeper, primordial. It loomed larger now, its center coalescing into something almost tangible, an outline, a figure. No longer amorphous, it was Elias himself the shadow reflected, distorted and monstrous, warped beyond recognition. Do you still not know? The voice emerged, not external, but from within Elias's skull, and it resonated with the weight of his own tone, low, guttural, and brimming with cruel certainty. I am yours. I always have been. Elias stumbled backward, his breath catching painfully in his throat as his shadow image stepped closer. His eyes burned with accusations, heavy with truths he couldn't escape. You carve your cruelty into others as easily as you carve the wood, it continued, circling him without motion. You abandon, you betray, you destroy, and now, you cannot run. You never could. Elias shook his head, ignoring the tears streaming down as panic frothed into self-loathing. No, that's not me! His words were empty, brittle, meaningless. The shadow shifted forward, its laughter hollow and cutting. Look closer, it demanded, and the walls and floor of the workshop vanished into blackness. What remained was Elias's reflection, towering and grotesque in a sea of emptiness. Every cruelty reflected back, every neglected face, every betrayal woven into the features of the monster that stared at him. The jaw of the shadow twisted into a jagged smile, split wide like an abyss. You've spent years running from the truth, because facing it, accepting it, that would shatter you. And now... Its voice softened but still carried the weight of finality. Now you are mine, Elias. You always were. The strings tightened, invisible but unrelenting, sinking deeper into him, into his mind, his chest, his very being. Elias collapsed to his knees, choking on the truth his shadow forced upon him. And in the cold, oppressive dark, no mercy remained. Something inside Elias shattered completely as the strings tightened, pulling his limbs into an unnatural dance. He couldn't fight. He couldn't resist. In truth, he wasn't even sure if he wanted to anymore. His arms moved, lifting with a grotesque rhythm, his legs jerking into place with marionette-like precision. He spun, he twitched, he bowed. Around him the shadows crowded closer, forming an invisible audience whose airless presence pressed down on his soul. And then it stepped out of the darkness. The shadow, no longer just a formless void. It had shape now, more monstrous than the reflection he'd seen before. Its body was an amalgamation of his failures, a grotesque collection of sharp angles and twisted features that somehow remained sickeningly familiar. It stood beside him, the true puppeteer, its clawed fingers tugging at strings Elias could not see but felt deep inside. Dance, it whispered, the voice no longer just in his head, but all around him, vibrating in the walls and the floor. They are watching. Our work is almost done. Elias tried to scream, but his voice was no longer his own. His jaw hung open but produced only silence, a hollow, gaping void of compliance. His body twisted and turned, performing for the unseen watchers, his every movement a mockery of free will. The marionettes that had once been his creations dangled from the rafters, their faces locked into warped smiles as if laughing at his torment. The workshop began to decay around him, the walls crumbling into splinters, the air thick with the stench of rot. His workbench, his tools, even the lamp that had once bathed the room in its fragile glow, all dissolved into ash-like dust. Yet Elias remained, trapped in the endless performance. The shadow crouched close, its malformed head leaning next to his ear. There is no escape, Elias, there never was. You are mine now, and I... It tugged the strings, forcing his arms into a mock embrace of the darkness. I am you. As the last remnants of the workshop dissolved into nothingness, Elias's mind cracked completely. He could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and where the shadow began. The strings pulled tighter, dragging him deeper into the void. His vision blurred, the edges fraying into black. The final thing he saw was the shadow's grotesque hand pulling strings, his strings, with one last mocking tug. And then there was nothing. So tell me, dear listener, the next time your shadow lingers just a little too long, will you be sure it's still yours? Subscribe for more chilling tales and hit the bell to stay in the dark. See you at the next Quiet End.